Hello, I'm Sarah Barth, Executive Director of Semper Virens Fund. Thank you for joining Under the Redwoods, the webinar series in which we explore the beauty, history, science, and benefits of redwood forests. I think many things, including the CZU wildfire, have really been indicative of the ways in which we have separated ourselves from nature, distanced ourselves, imagined that we are something other. When in reality, of course, we are nature. We are part of it. It's all around us. And our stories are bound up in nature stories. They are intertwined. And so that's why I'm really pleased today to be joined by our next guest. She has a great many roles in the world, including writer, activist, cultural producer, film producer. She's co-founded an experimental arts collective. She runs a hybrid worker cooperative and a healing and retreat center in Minnesota called Root Springs that caters to the BIPOC and LGBTQ communities. And the reason we've invited her today, as if those other things weren't enough, is she is the editor of and a contributor to an anthology of stories called A Darker Wilderness, Black Nature Writing from Soil to Stars that was published by Milkweed Press. It is a lyrically beautiful set of essays and stories by various authors, including Erin. And I'm just delighted to be speaking to her today about the book and how the project came together. So welcome, Erin Sharkey.
Hello.
Hello.
Thanks for that introduction. So good to be with you today and to be with all of the folks that are with us in virtual space as well. Yeah, I'm very excited to be here. Can I just get started?
You can. I'm going to hop off as you share your screen.
All right, I'll see you back so we can chat in a little bit. Awesome. All right, well, I was so honored to be asked to be part of this series. I am a deep lover of the redwood forest. I got to study for a bit in college in the Klamath Mountains in Southern Oregon, in a tiny little philosophy program on a mountain. And so, yeah, just a very deep well of love for that region and for the work that this organization is doing to preserve what is a very important place in the globe for our health and for our well-being and just in general. So I'm here today to talk to you about A Darker Wilderness, Black Nature Writing from Soil to Stars, which came out in February of this year and was really a passion project of mine. And yeah, I'm just so happy that it's out in the world so that folks can access it. So I think the first couple things, I'd love to have a sense of who is in the room. These virtual things are awesome because they increase accessibility and they allow for many different communities to access information and conversation. But it sort of feels like I'm talking to myself in my office. So I'd love if you are near your computer, if you feel inclined to, if you'd use that Q&A function, I'd love for you to think about a place that was formative for you in your love of nature. So it's a place that maybe you spent in your formative years as a child or a young adult that really impacted you and really made you feel the power of the expanse or something very tiny. I'd love if you wanted to share those in the Q&A and I'll be able to see them there. Awesome. For me, I was trying to think of one place. I think I learned a lot of imagination in my grandparents' yard. They lived in a little suburb of the Twin Cities called Hopkins, Minnesota, and they had a wonderland of a backyard. We built forts underneath their big pine trees and spent the winters, building snow forts and sledding down their hills and cross-country skiing and catching dragonflies. And anyway, it was a place where I learned to imagine and learned to care about the environment. So thank you for the folks that are going to share in the Q&A. I thought that the best way to start is to read from the introduction to the book. The book has essays from 11 Black writers. The vast majority of them are original to this collection. There is an essay by Lorette Savoy, who is reimagining an essay she wrote in her book, Strayed, which is, I'm sorry, her book is called Trace, and it's about the name of things and the ways that we're contending with racist names for places. And it was an essay that was written 10 or 15 years ago, and so much has happened in the last decade around reclaiming of names, and so it was an important essay to update. The rest of the essays are new to this collection, and they're just a vast variety of different kinds of essays, personal, lyric, research-based essays. I'm gonna play some images from the book and other images of the archive of Black folks in nature. The archive is very important to this collection. Each of the essays in the collection are anchored by an archival object. So they're in conversation with an archival object, in part to emphasize the way in which Black folks have been in relationship with nature, many of them stewarding nature since before America was America. And so the oldest objects in the book are from the 1700s through to very contemporary objects from the 80s. And also, I think the things I'd ask you to hold as I'm reading from the book are two different things. One is that nature is not neutral. It is a political space, and that our relationship with nature is political. So it matters where we think nature is, who we think nature belongs to, what is defined as nature, and how close or far is it from ourselves and our own spaces. And then the other thing is that the archive is similarly not neutral. The archive, which is just a way of talking about like historical record, specifically in objects, and it is subject to lots of structural issues, right? So we don't collect everything. That's impossible to really have an archive that reflects everything. We have to make choices. And those choices sometimes reflect bias on the behalf of institutions or archivists. Also has to do with resources and where those resources are allocated. And so there is less on the record for Black folks than for white folks in this country, and it matters. And so just keep that hold of that as I read a little bit from the introduction, which is called More to be Shaped By. I'll start here. Oh wait, I'm going to start sharing some pictures so you can see pictures from the collection as I read. It's an essential component. All right, here they go. So much nature writing is about freedom and access to vast spaces that provide crisp air and opportunities for fresh perspectives. But this collection's origins lie in a revelation that came to me while teaching nature writing in a prison setting, where participants didn't have access to such liberative experiences. I began teaching in prisons in 2016 after years of activism in response to the violences of the injustice system. I've always preferred teaching in non-traditional classrooms. I'm sorry, these slides are going very fast, so I'm gonna slow them down so that you can actually see them. I'll pick back up. Right. I've always preferred teaching in non-traditional classrooms and found that the best education happens between students across differences, whether in race, age, or a socioeconomic experience. This is exactly the kind of teaching that happens in prison classrooms. And beneath this motivation, I felt an unanswered desire to understand my long absent father, who was incarcerated for a time when I was a child. I taught classes from memoir to lyric essay in prisons before answering a call for a new class offering and proposed a 15-week nature writing class for Minnesota's largest facility, a former mental hospital in the southern part of the state. I began teaching in the waning days of summer. During the class, we marked the way nature transcended the walls of the institution. On the first day, a blaze orange fox ran across our path to the education building. Over the length of the course, an old growth aspen grew unbounded, peeling its curling bark, shedding its browning leaves, holding the first snowflakes on its branches. The writers moved through their days on a schedule imposed by a crackling voice over a loudspeaker, but they also watched birds gliding freely past the windows, industrious yellow jackets throwing their bodies against the glass, and a flock of mallards who navigated puddles in the yard, ignoring the guards watching from their towers. The course spanned the entire fall, from September, when the light stretches long into the evenings, to December, when students craned their necks to mark the waxing moon as they made their way back to their units. Students remembered summer trips out west, cliff jumping in Oregon, dust storms while serving in the military, working on the farm as boys, and their favorite winding riverside drives. Nature was a meeting place for writers with very different backgrounds. They were Black and white, Hmong and Anishinaabe. Some grew up in the city, some in the country, some on a reservation, some were from Minnesota, and some were from faraway places. Over those weeks, the 15 students remembered nature's power to teach us about ourselves, to help us connect to others, to mark time in its passing, to gain and regain perspective. And I learned from them that nature can shape our lives, even in unnatural conditions like those experienced by the incarcerated.
Erin,
yep.
I'm so sorry to interrupt, but we have not been able to see the images on our screens. If you're seeing them on yours.
I am, but maybe they're not meant to be seen unless you want to share them from your end. I'm happy if you wanted to interrupt me to do that.
Why don't you go ahead and we'll work on trying to get those up on the screen.
Thank you. All right, a little about me. I grew up in the Twin Cities between St. Paul and Minneapolis, the city of lakes. I shook sand out of my shoes nearly every evening of the summer, evidence of days spent in the city's beaches. A golden tan bloomed on my brown skin, my nose and forehead freckled. I marked years this way. Summers were like this. Kids from our South Minneapolis United Methodist Church crammed into a retired Bluebird bus, learning about the Bible and praising Jesus in nature under high pines and on the shores of the state's 10,000 lakes. The fall, a blaze of red and orange tornado drills. The spring, lilacs and lilies of the valley, floods. The winter, dozens of varieties of snow. Knowledge that the coldest days are the ones with the clearest, widest skies. All of this was natural. Each summer of my childhood, my family loaded up in our maroon minivan and embarked on a road trip. The varied landscapes of North America flew by my window in a blur. For weeks at a time, we made our home in a clearing, slept in our big gray 5-person Columbia tent, and set up our kitchen and living room on a long picnic table and around a fire pit in plain view of our new temporary neighbors. This public expression of our familial cadence out in the open welcomed questions about our racial makeup. My 2 white parents, my mom and my stepdad, my tow-headed little brother, the baby adopted from Guatemala, and me, a big-boned mixed-race Black girl. Across the nation, I met other kids exploring the woods and lazy streams, in national parks and wildernesses. They were white and curious. The inescapable questions: are you Black? Why aren't you with your real parents? I learned that nature is a place where you can't escape the oppressive rules of race. I learned that I had access to natural spaces because of my parents' privilege and resources, their jobs as a teacher and a bureaucrat, their time off in the summer, their own experience with travel as children. and because of their race, which granted them comfort in the wilderness, in spaces like those campgrounds in rural areas of this country. In the prison writing class, we started with the basics. Born in the 18th century, nature writing grew out of an effort to describe and categorize the attributes of birds and animals and insects, a list that grew as more of the world was discovered. This discovery was violent because it was a tool of colonization, with explorers conquering new lands and with it, nature that was unfamiliar to them. Natural history museums also flourished during this time. They often featured human specimens, particularly indigenous peoples, as well as plants and animals. The grave-robbed remains of 22 Inuit endured in the archives of the Chicago Field Museum until 2011. The San Diego Museum of Man displayed human remains into 2012. The hierarchy of colonization is reproduced within natural history in the sorting of some humans as subjects rather than scientists. The work of empire, conquering and categorizing and cataloging, is in this field in which nature writing emerges, making its appearance in response to the conditions of the state: industrialization, capitalism, urbanization, democracy. One of the trademarks of the genre is that it is rooted in first-person observation, so it is vital to investigate the identities of the observers. Let's consider Henry David Thoreau, one of the central figures of the field. Before Thoreau set out to live deliberately, he had ample leisure time and resources to imagine the Walden Pond Project. He embarked on Independence Day, 1845, for the 2-year, 2-month, and 2-day experiment. He had just been released from a brief stay in jail, having been arrested for failure to pay poll taxes in protest of slavery and the Mexican-American War. His debt was paid by a member of his family. The land his cottage was built on was owned by a dear friend, Ralph Waldo Emerson. The students in the nature writing class noted the similarity of Thoreau's 10 by 15 cottage to the size of the cells they occupied. The genre remained dominated by white, cisgender men with access to resources. Thoreau's Walden was followed by Audubon's trees and Darwin's finches, which were then followed over the following century by Burroughs' trout, Leopold's gray owl, Abbey's desert, and Paulin's farm. Men who moved towards conservation. Their female counterparts considered nature and the body. Rachel Carson, Terry Tempest Williams, and Annie Dillard invited readers to consider the environmental impacts of development and the ways our spirituality can form in relationship to nature. Just as the ways we experience nature in this country, they're not isolated from our identities. Nature writing is not neutral. Nature writing is rooted in the American experiment. Think independence, innovation, Western expansion. But who is left out of the canon just above? Collection addressing the presence of Black people and their contributions is in itself a distinctive American project. Despite efforts to the contrary, Black Americans' relationship to nature has persisted from the Middle Passage, when our ancestors traveled the westerlies in the bellies of ships, and from the toils in the field and the intimate domestic spaces of white families. It has persisted beyond the state's continued barriers against Black people's building positive relationships to natural spaces. It has persisted beyond Jim Crow laws that legislated violence, impeding free movement along the scenic highways of the South. It has persisted beyond redlining, which relegated Black communities to areas of disinvestment near toxic, smelly uses like waste storage and industrial manufacturing that come with a myriad of environmental and health consequences, including asthma and lupus. These consequences do not mean that Black people don't have a relationship with nature. On the contrary, Black folks have been instrumental in the stewardship and care of the land, and though their labor has often been carried out under poor conditions or in service to land not under their ownership, skill and innovation have been evident in their relationship with it. Awesome. Okay. So I will stop there and maybe invite Sarah back to chat a bit about nature.
There we go. Thank you for that. I think you alluded to this in your remarks you were just making about, and as I was listening to you, I was thinking in my head about Lin-Manuel Miranda and the song in Hamilton in which they talk about who tells the story, right? And the importance of having Black stories relative to nature in the canon because it doesn't exist otherwise. But I wondered if you could say a little bit more about what you hope to achieve with this writing. I think you alluded to what motivated you, but what are your aspirations for what the audience takes away from these stories?
Yeah, I have been really pleased with the conversations that we've been having since the book's has come out. I think that for me, I welcome folks to reflect on how their relationship with nature was formed and to think about that in relationship to the rest of their lives and to think about the ways in which their identity has been impacted by nature and how nature has been impacted by their identities. And I think that because the book includes such a varied variety of experiences, and at the heart of each of them is questions around liberation, questions around autonomy, around relationship, around impact. I think that it's welcome folks to do that kind of reflecting and to think about how their own story might fit within a chorus of other stories. So that's been really fun to talk with folks about.
I read somewhere, it might have been in your intro essay, or I'm not sure which of the authors wrote this, but somebody wrote they want to push the limits of your definition of nature to the reader. Yep. And I wondered, which I think is important and something that as I get older, I feel like I've learned more and more about and think more and more about. But I wondered if you could say more about what your definition of nature is. And certainly for those who haven't had the chance yet to read the book, there are many definitions reflected by the different authors in the book. But I'm curious about yours, Erin.
Thank you for that question. It's a hard one because it's growing all the time. And I think I've been really invited in the editing process and in the conversations I've been having to think about how nature isn't a place, that nature can be a relationship. It can be about our own relationship with ourselves. I think nature provides an opportunity to think beyond the binary, which I think is such a critical tool of capitalism and the sort of modern moment that is, what is the value to yourself of saying that's a thing that's separate from me as opposed to me, or there is parts of nature that is good or bad, or there is nature that is wild and nature that's tamed. There is an emotional intelligence and there's logical intelligence. I think that nature provides an opportunity for us to take down that barrier, that border in between the binary, and to really think about how we are nature. I think that that's been such a gift to myself, is to think about the way that I am impacted just now by the way that the light just moves, so it's coming in the window in a new way. That is my relationship with nature, right? The way that my body is in relationship to the moon and its magnet, and that nature doesn't need to be good just like to be valuable, that it could also be fierce and frightening, and that's also nature and something that we can be in relationship with and learn from. Yeah.
And you said, and you said it in the book, and then you just said it again now, nature is neither good nor bad, it's neutral, or it's not neutral in a political sense, but it is neither good nor bad, it just is. And I'm curious, as you think about nature being political, if you can say more about what that looks like in today's world, or what it means to you.
Yeah. Well, we were talking earlier in a call about this controversy that's come up around Jason Aldean's song around Not in My Town, which has really let people start talking about the ways that we hear these dog whistles that harken back to Sundowner Town politics and the ways in which folks have really worked very hard and often invoked violence in order to protect something that feels sacred and only theirs. And the ownership of those sort of net places is really important. And it's really meant that that has been very violent, or the threat of violence has been present for folks who are trying to navigate rural spaces, and not just rural spaces, but all over the place. And so, yeah, I think that for me, I think because we live in a system where some people own land, many, some land is public land, some land is very confusing because it has been reservation land that has been, the treaties are, and like there's so much complication around who belongs where, who owns what, that we are knocking up against these questions around who belongs where and what belongs where, who has power to make decisions about things and our resources. So I think it's critical right now to be thinking about how we use our own individual power to share resources, to steward well, to think about the impact that is down the river from where we are.
Yeah, and as an organization that buys land and owns land and sometimes transfers land for the purposes we hope of the public being able to access it, these are questions that I think we need to think more deeply about. And in recent years, I think our eyes have been opened organizationally to these questions, right? Ranging from the fact that much of the organization's history has been about creating state parks or other public lands that I think we thought everybody would feel were theirs. And in reality, we're learning, no, many people don't feel safe or welcome or represented at a place like a state park. They don't feel represented in the names and the stories. They don't see themselves out on the trails or people who look like them. They feel like this is not for them. And so that's been a huge wake-up call for the larger conservation community, I would say, over the last decade. And similarly, Sempervirens has a deep relationship with our indigenous friends, and they have a complete, and not to generalize, because all tribes have different narratives and stories and origin tales, but throughout there's a pretty common theme that nobody owns the land and nobody owns nature. That's a ridiculous concept. And so, and yet here's my organization owning land. That is what we do. So it's caused us to really think a lot about it. And I'm curious how, as we look as an organization to expand the way we help make land accessible more broadly, what are the things that you would encourage organizations like us to do to be allies to voices who are raising these questions? I mean, we're having you on this webinar, but what are other things that we can do, those of us or organizations like ours who have power, who own land, to help change the dynamic that exists now in this country?
Wow. Big questions.
Yes, that is a big question. Maybe just solve it in 2 minutes.
All right, let me tell you, I have the plan. Well, I think I'm in a new relationship with that as being one of the cooperative owners of land for the first time in my life.
Yes.
And I think we had to think really intentionally and to bake into the fabric of our organization and into our decision making around what does it mean for us to take a piece of land off the speculative market and to think about its long potential and to invest in sharing it. And that sharing isn't just saying like, you can come, but like, it's also, we think about it in little ways. Like, how does the signage say, yes, you can, as opposed to don't do this, don't do that. Also thinking about like, we have designs for the space and things we think would be great, But sometimes it's about sharing the decision making around the uses and not thinking that you have the best use or the most crucial use, that sometimes
Or
you
all
see.
the answers.
Exactly. Yeah. And then for us, it's about, we're still, thinking and feeling into how to be in best relationship with the Dakota and Anishinaabe and Ojibwe folks that are in our region. There's a group of women who've been using the land as a sweat lodge for many, many years. And that relationship is very important to us, and we'll continue to make decisions in partnership with them. But also we're thinking about how we pay reparations, and we think about being in relationship, and thinking about how we continue to share. So we have like a pretty simple model for how folks can access our rest spaces, the cabins that are on our land. But we also have a really robust, we call it a Solidarity Stay Fund. And that's for folks who are doing frontline work or have experienced a big loss or are navigating some challenges in their family, and they just need to be outside of the city. And or outside of wherever they are. It's been a really challenging time, as it has been for many, many folks through the pandemic, and also through the uprising here in Minnesota and the ripple effects of the murder of George Floyd. And so being able to offer that and to think about time in nature and time in respite as an essential component to community organizing, and that's sort of people work. And so part of that is about organizing funders and making sure that they are seeing rest as an important part of the cycle of all good things. And yeah, so I don't know if any of that really translates, except that I think intentionality is really important. I think thinking about who's part of the group of people making decisions. It's about making sure there's as many opportunities for folks to learn skills, to be part of deciding about uses. It's important for me to think about why do I feel competent camping? Just like I know how to start a fire. I feel like I kind of know what to do when certain things happen. I can make a decent breakfast over fire, those sort of things. Like I know how to forage or carry a canoe from one place to another.
Yeah.
But that's a skill set that came because of my very specific story and very specific opportunities. And I shouldn't confuse that with some sort of innateness or some sort of like, that it's easy for everyone,
Yeah.
And I think thinking about, folks with multiple abilities, I think being an asthmatic, an allergic person, a fat person has really helped me think about the ways in which we share access to things and think about increasing access.
Yeah. I think many of this translates into the work that we do and the things that we are organizationally thinking about. And I'm struck by the fact that Semper Virens just ended a training, 9-month training done with a group called Right Relations that was trying to help tribes and conservation organizations that were non-tribal come together and better understand one another and look for opportunities to be in right relation with one another. And many of the ideas that you're sharing are similar, including this notion that inclusivity means actually sharing control over decision making. And for an organization like ours that wishes to manage with science, manage for conservation, limit the harmful impacts of people on these landscapes, all things that we think are good and that we know how to do. The concept of sharing that decision-making with others is a very difficult one in some ways, not in concept, but in actuality, when push comes to shove. The idea that you would give up power over how land is managed or scarce resources are managed, that is the true test. And so I think we have a lot to learn from your farm and your program that you're involved with. I think my team needs to come pay a visit.
We'd love to host you. Please come. One thing that we've been practicing, and we've had to, the land that we're on has been a retreat center for 25 years.
Yeah.
It was formed by a group of nuns who lovingly, painstakingly built those cabins and made the trails, and they they cultivated a group of folks who really, it's central to their spiritual life to come to that space. So folks were disrupted by us taking it over. And I think that they had lots of questions about, is it still a space for us? And what does it mean that it's centering BIPOC folks and queer folks? Does that mean it can still come? And so we've been practicing asking folks to take another place in the circle, that when you're decentered, it doesn't mean that you're not in the circle. We want folks to be in our circle and to continue to visit. We know how important it is, but to think about the ways they could make a contribution differently. And that's really important. In Minnesota, part of the fabric of Minnesota is this up north culture. People talk about it all the time. Folks, many people have cabins. They have a place they go every year. And there are many ripple of incredible benefits from having those relationships. Folks, their their nervous system gets recalibrated. They get to see their mom push a lawnmower and like lay on a thing in the lake, stuff like that. That's like a great benefit, I think. And so we've asked, as we were fundraising for this project and in relationship with a bunch of folks, for folks to reflect on the ways that nature has benefited them and their relationships to their up north, and how they might share that with other folks. And that has been really incredible, and was really the heart of our fundraising effort, and the ways that we were able to share and to imagine a different place in the circle.
I wonder, I want to pivot for a moment and talk about and these all these themes are related, right? But I want to make sure we talk about the issue of names and what places are called, why that's meaningful. It's touched on in the book. You made some remarks about it just now. We are, as a country, in the middle of a process being led by the first ever Indigenous Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland. We similarly in this state have an examination of names going on, place names, to really better understand what we're communicating with some of these names. And I just wondered if you could say more about that for those who haven't read the book, how it comes up, and how you're seeing it play out in your part of the world.
Yeah. Well, there is an incredible essay in the collection, Lorette Savoy's essay.
Yeah,
and
it's beautiful.
Yeah, it's one of my favorites. And for each of the contributors in the collection, it started out with a conversation around sort of what a lot of it around how to get to the archival object. What was the thing we wanted to focus on in the conversation?
Did you pick the objects first?
In the courting process, where I was trying to get folks to agree to be part of the book, I sent them some ideas, 3 or 4 objects that I thought this might hook them, or I feel like this is a good question in relationship with their own work or a region, or something I thought would click. And one of the things that's really powerful in Lorette's essay is the extensive lists, just the sort of the ways that she really exhausts lists of names. And you start to get the impact of like, oh yeah, why are we calling ourselves, why are we naming this thing for a very hurtful word, or for to reflect a particular power dynamic that is maybe not in place anymore, or maybe is held up by the naming rather than by the identity of the place. And I think we've been having some really interesting conversations in this country about what do we do with monuments to folks that we're not that proud of being our leaders, and the names of our institutions. In my neck of the woods, there was a lake in the city, there are many lakes in the city, many buildings in the city, lots of university buildings they're considering their names again. But Bedemikoska is a lake that was the name of a neighborhood, name of dozens and dozens of businesses, and sort of the way that people define themselves or around the previous name of the lake. And Bedemikoska is not a word that rolls off of the descendants of Scandinavians' tongues really easily. It was a growth process. And I think having those conversations, having a conversation about how do we either honor the folks who were here and are continue to be here, that named this place before it was stolen? Or what does it mean to honor people who are our heroes currently, or give ourselves sort of the definitions that tell us where we're going? Yeah, there's a little suburb near me that's named Coon Rapids, which has been a place that folks have critiqued the name for many, many, many years. And the argument is that it has to do with raccoons and not with the racist connotation of that name. But at the heart is like, what does that matter? Like, how are you communicating the identity, which this place is full of strip malls. I don't know many raccoons that actually live there, and that's part of the identity of the place. But it also gives that community an opportunity to talk about what is the heart of us, like how do we want to define who we are and where we're going. Yeah, I think that there's really exciting opportunities in the renaming, and it makes sense that some folks who are really invested in a history of a thing or their own relationship with the history of a place might fight that. There's some practicalities that are hard. We have to get some sign for this bike shop, or we'll have to, that sort of thing. But it does sort of feel like an incredible opportunity for folks to redefine themselves in relationship.
Yeah, and I think whatever, in some cases, there's you know that a name is wrong because it's hurtful or inaccurate or just only tells part of the story. But it's not always obvious what the new name should be, that there are competing narratives and competing histories on a piece of land or a place, a geography. So it's not always easy from the examples that I've been associated with. And I think the most important thing coming out of it is the conversation it generates, because it's elevating awareness of these histories that have been hidden, or these dog whistles that some communities hear and others don't, just like that song has done. And that in and of itself, I think, is healing. If it allows for conversation and increased understanding and sort of an aha, oh, I never thought about that. I never thought that Squaw Valley, that I always thought of was the name of, a ski resort, might actually be really denigrating to many, many people. And it is, and there's no reason it needs to be named that. In fact, there are reasons it should not be named that. So I think that, just that dialogue, I hope, gets us in better relationship with one another.
Yeah. Yep. And to see it as an opportunity.
Yeah.
Yep.
I sidetracked you. Was there something, did you want to read from that essay, or anything more you wanted to say about naming? We got kind of off on I knew this would happen. This book is filled with interesting themes.
Yeah, it's such a great essay. It's hard to know where to pull out of it. I would just, encourage folks who are interested in this to look back at this essay if they ever get a chance to grab the book. I think, it's so rooted in this idea of the archive too. It's like, how can we go to things that teach us, and to not look at the archive as a static thing that like it is telling a particular true story about history, but that the archive is also reflective of the sort of questions that we were asking in the time that when we were collecting about what was important, about what is valid, what people thought would be important for the future. And so for me, I think this book has really, the process of making this book really reinforced for me that we can, and I think should, bring our imaginations to the archive and be in relationship with the archive, because for the writers to really triangulate their experience with an object, that they're writing about a story and the story is in conversation with something that maybe wasn't that evidently personal to them, it really creates this universal feel. I don't know if you felt that when you were reading it, but for me, it feels like, I could do a similar project where I could think about how I'm related to this point in history. And that allows us the power to imagine into something new, to fill in gaps, because we have, with the history of Black memory, the sort of archive of Black memory has so many holes that require us. And the sort of classic historical study says you just have to, the primary documents is what you have. But I think that there is a power in giving, letting our imagination bring flesh to these people, or to think about the emotional complexity of situations, or the things that are absent around the image. What is happening just outside of that image? I think that's really valuable.
Well, and seeing the images that are in the book, to me, reinforced how infrequently I see it in other settings. I'm a big museum goer, history buff. I read a lot. And I thought, wow, seeing this, of course, these people existed, and yet it's not reflected in much of the material you see. Same in our region. That's notable as well with the Asian American community that was instrumental in shaping California, and yet is not reflected in much of the archival material you see at museums and whatnot. I mean, I'm grossly generalizing, but that was one of the things as a reader that I came away with was, wow, look at the things that have not been talked about, not been shared. And here they are. Of course they're here, but we don't talk about
it's just the tip of the iceberg. And the iceberg is not actually that big. Like, you know what I mean? Not as big as so many other parts of the historical record. So yeah, I hope that inspires people to get nerdy like I am and get into archives, because they're really exciting. There's really cool things in there.
Well, the other thing that it really struck me is, we have been trying organizationally to make sure we tell broader stories, both historic and contemporary, and to reflect more accurately the diversity of people who love redwoods, are experiencing redwoods, etc. And we do that in part to connect with today's contemporary audiences. But I realized looking at your book that we are in part creating the historical record for generations down the road. And the more inclusive we can be now, the more accurately we help reflect history into the future.
So true. Yeah, I think it does change your life when you realize you are an archivist too. What are you keeping? What matters to you? How are you telling the story? Yeah.
All right. Well, I know that we have questions from the audience, so I'm going to stop asking you questions, because I have a whole list I could keep asking, because it's such an interesting topic and you're very thoughtful. But I want to open it up to my colleague, Matt Schaefer, and see if he has some questions for us from our audience that he wants to share.
Thanks so much. And thanks, Erin, for joining and for being flexible with the images earlier. I also wanted to thank you for inviting folks to share their stories. I don't know if you had a chance to skim them, but we got so many great stories about folks and their earliest experiences in appreciating nature. So thank you for inviting folks to share their stories. One of the questions we got was related to activist needs. In other words, like, is there anybody in the anthology it sounds like speaking to what's happening in movements maybe today, for example, to address decolonization in systems, that kind of thing. What do some of the stories have to say about our relationship to nature in those kinds of political contexts?
Yeah. Well, I think the essay that comes to mind first is Naima Penniman's essay in the collection. She's a farmer in New York State and an incredible writer and poet who traveled the world with climbing poetry. And I was so happy when my friend said she would write an essay for the book. And I knew that it would be rooted in her life as an activist and the ways in which she has been working on conservation efforts through her artwork. And so, that essay has got some really great gems, some steps, some ways to do some meditation. It's it's both a personal essay, some reflection about some time that she spent in Haiti, doing some work after the earthquakes there, and some other work having to do with water conservation. So that's the essay I direct you to look at first. And I think that each of them has a different sort of, not all of them have the aim towards being like a real thesis-driven essay where many of them are just sort of meandering through their experience, trying to attempt to understand something about their own lives and experience. Some of them are pretty quiet, domestic sort of space pieces, and other pieces feel really big. The other essay that comes to mind is Alexis Pauline Gumb's essay, in which she tries to reposition Audre Lorde as a nature poet and consider why she hasn't been thought of as a nature poet up until now. So those are the two essays I direct you to look at when you get the book. Thanks for your question.
Yeah, thank you for sharing some insights into some of those stories. Those were great essays. I'm wondering if you could talk about your own writing process, what it's like, and how does nature feature in your writing routine?
Yeah. Well, I'm a multi-genre writer. I really like hybrid sort of pieces. And so often the subject matter comes to me and then it picks a form. So I write for the stage. I've been doing some work in film. I've been do some visual arts as well, write in all different kinds of genres. So I love a retreat for writing. I've really benefited from having time quiet, unplugged, time for rest too, like taking long naps. I love to think about the writing process, not just as pen on paper or fingers on keyboard, that it's also in conversation. It's also around experience. It's around getting bored. I love to try really hard to get bored. Those are my best days. I think I get my best ideas in those sort of spaces. We were invited to visit the space that's now called Root Springs, our retreat. And there's 3 cabins on the land, and one of them is a geodesic dome that we have now named for Octavia E. Butler. And I walked into the dome and it said to me, you could write a book here. And I didn't know that I was asking that question, but it knew that I needed a space to tell me that I could do that. So yeah, I've been trying to figure out a good balance of laundry and cleaning and guest care and also writing. So that's my project right now, is to figure out how to carve away the sort of sacredness of that space, because it told me who it was. So I have to listen to that.
That's really fascinating. I have a personal follow-up question. You just talked about a space sort of speaking to you. Where do you think that comes from? How are you able to hear guidance from objects? And I think that probably connects to the idea of these.
I didn't hear the last word that you said, but I'm happy to answer what I think you're asking. I think that as a young person, like, I feel like I had a different relationship with my spirituality, but it did have to do with trusting my voice and trusting the voice that's speaking inside of me, that I'm not just me, that there are lots of ways that the space is talking to me, and the spirit's talking to me, and ancestors are talking to me. And that doesn't usually come as like really articulated words in English in my head. It's more like a magnet. It feels like I get pulled in certain ways, or I feel like an arrival where I feel like, oh, like a feeling of something inside of me being acknowledged. And that's what it felt like. It was like, yeah, it was sort of whispering, like, don't you think, look at the light there, like, it's so quiet. The acoustics were doing a lot of the work. So it mostly is around paying attention and a slowing down. And that's one of the other features of the land that we purchased, is that it really feels like your body is invited to decompress. We're on a dead end road. It's quiet. I don't think I've ever come onto the land where there weren't like wild turkeys or a whole bunch of geese, or the swans that live down the block, or deer. Like, something welcomes you, or our barn cats do that. And so, yeah, I can feel it physically when I'm on the land. I can feel more calm and more present. Things slow down a bit.
Thank you so much for that.
Mm-hmm.
I know you're you talked about multi-genre writing, and I know you do a lot of multimedia work. We are in a time when there are a lot of distractions, a lot of visual distractions and screens. Do you have any recommendations for folks on how to pull away from screens and get out into nature? And one of our guests asked if you ever do work with students or at schools.
Yeah. I love young people. Kids are like my favorite thing. So, and I came up as a kid in programming, and my first jobs were youth jobs. I love young people, and I spent 10 years working on an urban farm in Buffalo. It's one of my favorite places in the world. I think that I am navigating my own relationship with devices. I think that it's a bad story, you know, that they're addictive. So I think like physically being away from those things. I think about, I try to trick myself into like getting sucked in. I try to write longhand, and then I do transcription from that. It also is like a great addition to my writing practice. It's like it builds in a revision step that I like a lot. Yeah, and you know, in terms of young people, I'm eager for more opportunities to hang out with young people. And yeah, we have some young people that have been visiting Root Springs and continue to build with them, I think. So yeah.
Thank you, Erin. I think we are out of time, but we'll have to have you back. And I think I have to bring my very device-connected children up with me to visit your farm.
I'd love to have you. Please come.
So I want to thank you so much for joining me. Thank you for producing that amazing book. I really want to encourage the audience to check it out. I know also you are going to be doing a writing class with Orion. So if folks want to learn more about that, I think it was posted in the chat. So anyway, thank you to our audience for joining us. This webinar will be available on our website, probably later today or tomorrow. And we hope that you all will join us next week. We have Erica Geis, the author of Water Always Wins, and she is going to speak with us about our dysfunctional relationship with water in the world, and what's to be done about that. So please join us for that, and we'll see you on the other side. Thanks for joining us. And thanks again to Scharf Investments for supporting this series. Okay, see you soon. Bye, Erin.